Due to the corona pandemic, online training and online teaching has become much more important. I'll try and share some of my experiences and some tips and tricks. Of course, this is all very much work in progress. The software stack to use should at least include something to do screen recordings. There are quite some options. Option which I'm using is TechSmith's Camtasia. It's a very nice application that allows you to do screen capturing, but also to post-process the screen captures, mix them with other media, and so on. You can annotate captures. It's a really nice tool. However, it's of course not particularly cheap. So this is Camtasia in action for the recording I'm making for this online presentation about online teaching and online training. So you've got the media bin, and that essentially contains the clips which you're recording. And those you can drag and drop onto a timeline, which is below. And as you can see, there are several tracks. So the first track is the one on which all my recordings are. However, there are some other tracks as well. For instance, in this part, I was in fact talking about the Camtasia product, and I superimposed a second track with a screenshot of that website. And on top of that, I did a third track, which is the effect that you have seen, that the price of the product was in fact highlighted. So this allows you a lot of freedom. For instance, you can also have effects, like for instance here, this would be a fade in and a fade out, and other effects are possible as well. So basically this is dimming and and its reverse, whatever you call that, which allows you to add a bit of elegance to your presentation. Camtasia has a learning curve. It takes a little bit getting used to, but I think if you do online training or online teaching for a reasonable amount of time, it's really worth it. It's also interesting to do short clips for user documentation and so on. So in my opinion, it's a good investment, both in terms of price and time investment, given what you can get out of it. An alternative, which is much cheaper, is Snagit by the same company. This just allows to do screen capturing. Frankly, I have no experience with it, but it is a lot cheaper and probably also with a, let's say, less steep learning curve. And of course, each operating system, both Windows and macOS, have actually tools built in to do screen capturing. So you could also go with those. However, then of course, you don't really have any options to do post-processing yet. For presentations, I typically use Microsoft PowerPoint. The advantage is that it's very easy to do animations, and that helps to build up your story so that your presentation actually supports your story rather than is a story by itself. A good alternative would be Google Slides, because that allows you to share your presentation online in the format that is immediately viewable by anyone, regardless of operating system, regardless of whether Microsoft PowerPoint or Apple Keynote is installed. By the way, if you just need a PowerPoint voiceover, then actually all you need is PowerPoint, because it contains some support for that and you don't need any additional tools. A few tips. A rather important one is to check your microphone prior to every recording. I can assure you that it is pretty frustrating when after 15 minutes of recording you notice that either the operating system or some application has decided to mute your microphone. It's also important to minimize background noise. Of course, you won't be able to eliminate it completely. There's always some noise going on in the background, ventilators and so on, but at least try and make sure that you're in a quiet room without any noise of traffic or other distractions. Don't talk too fast. I'm prone to that, but basically it's something that you really need to try and avoid in a screencast. And it's also very important to leave pauses. That helps you quite a lot when, for instance, there is a part which you don't like and want to replace. If there are definite pauses between sentences, that is feasible, otherwise you would have to start over from the beginning. With respect to visuals, minimize visual complexity. If an image is too complicated, it's hard to follow and it will make your narrative more difficult to understand. Also ensure that text is legible. So, been there, done that, especially for code. It's quite important that people can actually read it. And of course the same goes for plots and other images. They should be easy to read, even on somewhat smaller resolutions. So how to deploy your training? Typically I use YouTube for videos. However, if your institution has its own video server, then you might also opt to use that. Of course, keep in mind that outsiders for VSC trainings should actually have access. Typically for presentations I'll use 720p because that reduces the required bandwidth a little bit and also reduces file sizes. For code I'll typically go to 1080p just to get the extra resolution, which might help reading the code. Typically for each training I have a GitHub repository that contains the slides, and it also contains any additional material like code snippets, example code, Jupyter notebooks and so on. So if participants are not able to read, for instance, a code snippet, they can always go to the GitHub repository and look at it on their own machine in their own preferred way, with preferred font sizes and so on. Also, there is a website to that repository, and that would contain information on the training, like the duration, the subject which will be covered, the prerequisites and so on. And of course also a link to the repository, as well as a link to the videos. This is an example of such a website. So basically there are the learning outcomes for this training. There is the schedule. This is usually for face-to-face training, but okay. There is a link to the GitHub repository and links to video sessions, target audience, prerequisites, the name of the trainer and so on. So the GitHub repository itself contains quite a lot of material. So there is the slides, which are used during the training. In this case, since it's Python, there is also environment definitions for Conda in order to set up an environment to follow along and execute the code examples. There is a directory with hands-on material that can be used during the training. And there is a source code directory that contains applications and other code which illustrates concepts in the training. The docs directory contains the website which we just saw. The actual sessions can be a mixture of, on the one hand, pre-recorded material, and on the other hand, live parts, for instance using chat, and then you can use, for instance, Skype Google Hangouts or some other screen sharing conferencing software. And screen sharing in the sense that, for instance, you can share your own screen for live demos. Basically, that helps when people have entered questions in the chat. You can answer those textually in the chat, or you can answer them verbally after a live recording has been viewed. After a pre-recorded video has been viewed, and then perhaps go into details using screen sharing and live coding. It is also possible to have participants share their screen, but of course that needs to be quite clear then that all participants can view their screen. So a bit of, let's say, privacy awareness should be used here. So the session for Python for machine learning was in a sense directed. We started with a short introduction to how we would go about. Then the participants would view a video, and when that was done, there was a live session. So during viewing the video, they could enter questions in the chat window. Those would be answered in real time, and they would be discussed during a live session. And then the next video would be viewed, and so on until the end of the session. That seemed to work quite well. Participants seem to be happy with that. So that is definitely one way of going about it. The advantage of using pre-recorded material rather than doing everything live is of course that you don't have trouble when there is limited bandwidth or when a connection drops out either at the side of the trainer or of the side of the participants, and both happen. Actually, during that particular training, I had a blue screen of that, and no one noticed, because it was just during a period when there was pre-recorded material to view, and so basically none of the participants noticed that I dropped out for like a couple of minutes for my system to make a dump and to reboot and me to reconnect. What can also be very useful, especially if you are doing heavy hands-on, is to do a preparatory session first, basically making sure that everyone is on the same page, that if they require an account or they require certain software to be installed on their machine, that has already been done. So that preparatory session would be kind of troubleshooting, and this could happen a day or two in advance before the actual training event, so that when it's the day of the actual training event, you don't lose time with people having all kinds of technical difficulties. And of course, if you're using Skype, Google Hangouts or similar, you can always ask a participant to share his screen so that you can do some troubleshooting on the spot during such preparatory sessions. So one of the things which is a bit unsettling when doing online training, during preparation you're talking into a vacuum. You don't have anyone who is listening to you, you don't get any feedback. So basically that can be somewhat annoying at first. It's something you just have to get over with. So during the session itself, it's also a bit a weird situation because you have absolutely no visual feedback. If you're doing an actual training session face to face, you see a frown on someone's face, or you see some, let's say, signs that people don't really get your drift. So then it's very easy to correct for that. That's much harder in an online session since you have absolutely no clue, unless participants would use video, but then again that eats away your bandwidth, which can be used more usefully. So typically that is a bit of a problem. So some things that may help are online tools. So there is, for instance, Poll Everywhere and Socrative. they do kind of the same thing. They're intended to do online quizzes, and those can be very brief or they can be prepared. So this is a Socrative, and it allows you to work in two modes, either a quick question or prepared quizzes or other things. So a quick question is something you don't prepare in advance. You just ask a question by saying it out loud or putting it on a slide, and then you can have participants respond either to a multiple choice, a true or false, or a short answer. So you can do this very quickly, and it's intended for, let's say, ad hoc polling of your audience, of your participants. The other thing you can do is prepare quizzes in advance and then at certain points start using them. So here's an example of a very short quiz with just 3 questions. It's about C++. So you can have multiple choice questions, either with 1 correct answer or, as in this case, with 2 correct answers. You can also have yes and no questions, true and false questions, and then you can optionally provide an explanation. Or you can also have open questions with a brief answer, and you can add a list of potentially correct, or rather of correct answers. So with this you can accommodate for differences in spelling or differences in other minor details. So this is actually quite convenient and a nice tool to get some hold on how your participants actually are getting along. And as a teacher, as it's called in Socrative, you get an overview of the participants, how they answered, what was correct, what was incorrect. So that helps you getting feedback and potentially explaining some topics again or giving some additional information. So in conclusion, online training takes some time to get used to. It's, as I already mentioned, a bit of a shift in mindset, and it also requires a lot of careful planning, because during a face-to-face you get immediate feedback and you can react to whatever you notice in your participants, whether they have difficulties understanding something. It's much easier to remedy this. While of course, if you're doing this online, then you have to think up front, you have to be very proactive to whatever the difficulties the participants might have could be. So it will probably help a lot if you do this kind of online training for trainings you've already done a few times face-to-face. If you do that for a new training, it will be a lot harder. But then again, it may be worth the effort. So the question is this a long-term solution? The answer is it depends. One of the main problems right now is, of course, that the quality of what you can produce at home with some mediocre equipment may not stand the test of time. So that's one thing. You may be unsatisfied with the quality you can actually produce. However, I'd say, again, get over it, because typically your participants will be quite happy with what you produce, even if it's not professional quality. They do understand that this takes some effort, and they prefer that the content is okay rather than the, let's say, the niceties of a particular video. However, for long term, there is the issue of maintenance. Many things in HPC are temporary, will change over time, and changing aspects of a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, which you use in face-to-face trainings, is pretty easy. But changing pre-recorded videos takes a lot more effort. So that is definitely one of the things which has to be considered for long-term decisions. Another aspect which is, in my opinion, also very important is the value of face-to-face training, in the sense that the participants get to know you and also know who to address if they have trouble later on, and the barrier of contacting you in person will definitely be lowered. So in that respect too, the question to whether this is a long-term solution or not is for me at the moment quite open.